and we are a possibility ministry, a ministry that indeed begins to change the way we think. We begin to think differently. In fact, the way we advertised it at our seminar in Loma Linda was think possibility. So when we finish today, I'm going to be challenging you to think differently about me, think differently about others, but also to think differently about yourself. You see, we are a possibility, not a disability. We may have a disability. In fact, I think most of us do. In fact, the world tells us, the World Health Organization tells us that 1.1 billion people in the world have a disability. That's between 10 and 15% of the world population. And if we live long enough, we will all have a disability. So I always have to smile. I just have to tell you this. I always smile when I get on an airplane. Those with disabilities may board now. Now, if I would step up to the line, they probably wouldn't know why I would be up there. But you know, we all have different kinds of disabilities. We all have weaknesses of one kind or another. Some show and some don't show. There are these silent disabilities inside that we all have. And so what that says to me is learning to accept people of different stripes and colors and personalities and cultures. You see, I grew up on the West Coast. And how I ended up on the East Coast and then on the South. I mean, if you want to talk about a cultural difference, I was president of New Jersey before becoming president of Georgia Cumberland. Talk about a cultural change. Talk about a change. I finally discovered that Oregon and the Northwest is somewhere in between those two. I think that's why I was chosen, because God knew I've got to have somebody up there. You're going to have somebody down here. You're the best I got for right now. You're kind of weak, but you'll bridge the gap between. So God is good. What I have found is God's people everywhere are wonderful people. We may have different accents. I don't notice so much accent here. I suppose I just haven't been around long enough. But when I go to other countries, and I've been to several, I'm a boy who grew up on the farm in the Northwest and then in the Dakotas. And so I never went outside the United States. My wife and I met at Walla Walla College at the time, it's Walla Walla University now, and I never knew her before. We were both asked to serve on the same committee, Foreign Mission Band. That's a long time ago if they even call it bands. A Foreign Mission Committee or something like that. We were the only two who showed up. And I was the only one of the two of us who had never been outside of the United States. She had just come back from going to school in Cologne in France, and so it was an amazing. But what that has done for me, and what my travel outside the United States has told me, is that we all have a common denominator. We all have a need. We all have a need. We all have disabilities. But even more important than that is we all have possibilities. The Bible talks about a very important concept in Romans chapter 12. It says this: do not conform any longer to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In other words, the way you think must not be ingrained from the way the world thinks. We must have another way of thinking about our mission, about one another, even about ourselves. When I was in Georgia, I was invited to a hospital board meeting, and they had a special guest speaker. I've never heard of him. His name was Eric Venemeyer. Now, Eric is an unusual person. He's an athlete. He can climb mountains, whether they be covered with rock or ice or whatever. He's an acrobatic skydiver. He's just an amazing person. He I'm going to make sure I mention all the things that he can do. He is a scuba diver, long-distance biker, marathon runner, skier, mountaineer, just an unusual athlete. He has climbed the highest mountains in 5 continents of the world, including Mount McKinley and Mount Everest. It's amazing. But I haven't told you the amazing part yet. He did all of those things while he was blind. I mean, this is an amazing thing. This man is just an amazing person. He could climb some of these places that the rest of us only dream about. But the thing is that Eric did all of this while he was blind, and he became blind at the age of 13. What is amazing to me is Eric was an elementary teacher in public school for a class of 30 sighted students. How the school board chose him, I do not know. But here's a blind teacher teaching 30 elementary students. But he was smart. At least he thought he was. What he decided to do before, he says, now how am I going to teach these students? And I'm blind. You know, conventional wisdom says you put the sentences on the board. If you're going to teach English, you write the sentences on the board. Or if you're going to do math formulas, you put the math formulas up on the board. I mean, that's where you do it. So he says, I know what I'll do. So he bought some magnetic letters. And he put them in a little box, 1 over here, 2, 3, 4, and he had it all stacked up well. And then over here, he had the letters A through Z. They were all magnetic. Makes good sense. The guy is smart. So that first day didn't go quite well. He got the numbers and the letters mixed up. And so he put A, 5, Z, or whatever the case was. He got it all mixed up, and he could hear the snickers in the classroom. So he went home that night, and he said, oh, brother, what am I doing? What could I possibly do different? I mean, I don't want to fail. So, as a teacher, Eric had to unlearn much of what he had been taught about teaching. He said, if I do that, if I try to continue that way, it's just going to get messed up even more. His answer was sitting right in front of him. To find the answer, Eric was forced to ask different questions. To keep asking the same questions would bring the same answers, and that wasn't working. Eric had to come up with a different way of thinking in order to reach the students he had been asked to teach. And I asked myself, is it possible that the mission of the church is limited because we aren't asking the right questions? Maybe if we asked different questions and we began to see people differently and we began to see ourselves differently and we began to see the resources of the church differently, maybe we would get a different kind of response. And I began to think about the way I have approached so much of the work that has been given to me. And I say, maybe the answer is closer than I realize. Maybe we are the blind ones who are blind. Maybe the way we see things is the fault of ours because we have been conditioned by the world, by our own church, by the way we grew up. Maybe we have seen things in the wrong light. The way we see each other may need to be changed. Maybe the way we see ourselves need to be changed. I've been around a lot of important people in the church and outside of the church. As my mother once told me when I was so bashful, she says, "Larry, they all put their pants on one leg at a time." See? What is it that makes a person important? What kind of common denominator do we have with each other? Do we divide people by race, or by culture, or by accent, or by monetary standards? I've lived on both sides of that monetary standard. I had a very, very wealthy grandfather, and I remember in the early time when our car was repossessed after I was so proud of that brand new car. In those tough moments, those very difficult, my grandfather was a very large wheat farmer. He had the third largest wheat farm in the United States at one point. And I remember he didn't like to drive a pickup or a truck out into the wheat fields. But he didn't want people, so he liked to drive a car out into the wheat field. But he didn't want people to know that he had two cars. So he got two cars, exactly like one he drove on the farm, one he would drive to church. Make sense? No. But the impression that others would have of him, I know that people would always ask him for money. I don't do that anymore because I'm sensitive to the way people who have been blessed that way are always hounded. How we look at one another limits our response, limits the possibilities in others, and therefore the opportunities too. So I want to challenge you today, as my friends, as fellow church members, let us begin to think differently. There are about 1.1 billion, or close to 15% of the world population who have some kind of disability. When it comes to autism, globally, autism is estimated to affect 24.8 million people. And you'll understand more about autism this afternoon if you don't understand why this boy is covering his ears right now. Why is he covering his ears? If you know autism, you will understand that there is a sensory overplay that takes place. And what may seem to you and me at one time, the boy screaming and covering his ears in Sabbath school or church and walking out screaming, you may think it's a temper tantrum if you don't understand autism. And how we understand one another is very important. But I can't pass over this. Parents with special needs children need support and encouragement from their church family. The percentage of families who divorce who have autistic children is very high. I don't want to say what percent because I'm still questioning the percent that I've read. But it is very high. Understanding how we can support a family so that they can even have a date night once in a while is a feature that the church can offer to some of these families. So we have to learn to think in terms of possibility. You know, Eric Venemeyer is a reminder to us that conventional wisdom doesn't help solve some of the deepest emotional issues that we have. So how did Eric do it? Eric said, well, you know, I've got a problem. I can't see to put the letters on the board. I cannot see the sentences that I need to put on the board. I know in my mind what needs to be taught, but how can I do it? And then one day, he began to realize that the answer was right in front of him. He realized that the questions and the answers that he needed could be resolved by the people sitting in front of him. Just like some of the challenges I face, I think, are probably seated in front of me today. We have a challenge. So, Eric began to think, and it was a stroke of genius. Eric turned those students, those 30 students who were seated in front of him as his assistant teachers, and they put the sentences, they put the formulas on the board. As he instructed them, they became participants in the teaching process. Because why? Because what he was doing was not working well. What he was doing needed to change and to look differently. So we begin to find that Eric became a successful teacher. As I listened to Eric and as I read his book, I was surprised at how he told the story. There were times on climbing Mount Everest when it was really dark that the people in the team that he was climbing with would ask him to do the lead because, of course, Eric knew how to walk in the dark. Eric had that ability. And they needed his ability at particular times, and at other times, he needed their ability. They made a team that they would not have had otherwise. I've thought about that many times. As I faced different challenges, looked at some of the decisions I've made in the past that could have been better if I would have only thought things through in a bigger, wider sphere. One of the dangers we have is that we begin to label people the way we once knew them. So Martin, been 20 years. You remember me the way I was 20 years ago. To keep me in that might be better, I don't know, but I have changed. And something else that has happened to me, working with Possibility Ministries or Special Needs Ministries or Disability Ministries, spending time with these people around the world, a farm boy. I've been now over 80 countries. What have I seen? I've seen similarities. I've seen more similarities than I have found dissimilarities. Because we are all created in the image of God. I think I have time to tell a quick story. I have 2 stories to tell you, so let me tell you another story. I always have stories, so I have to be careful. I have too many stories. I was traveling at this time in, gone blank, name of the country. It's a landlocked country in South Africa, Lesotho. And as I was traveling in Lesotho, before I went there, I said, please, could you arrange for me to meet with the deaf while I'm in that area? And so I get down and travel, and I'm in South Africa region, on my way to Lesotho. And here they said, we're sorry, we don't have any Seventh-day Adventist deaf in Lesotho that we know of. But we made arrangements for you to go to a school. And there are some deaf people there. I said, fine, that's good. I'm learning. My point is, wherever I go, I want to learn from the people where I go. So I went up there, and I just wanted to walk around the campus. So it was very interesting. Concrete, you've got these African huts on concrete. This school using the African motif. And it was really nice. And so I just walked around, and I said, to the person with me, I said, I probably should go talk to the administrator. I went over to the administrator hut, and it was a lady who was in a wheelchair. A woman administrator in a wheelchair. I said, isn't this interesting? And we had a wonderful conversation. Wonderful lady, very talented, just a really nice lady. And she said, well, we better go. I said, what do you mean, we better go? Well, the students are waiting for you, and we better go there. I'm speaking to students? Yes, they've been waiting for you. I have no idea. Now, I come from America, obviously, and when we go to government schools or whatever, we have to be really careful about using religion and that kind of thing. So I was kind of shy, and so I went to the school, and I said, so I'm going to avoid anything that would have any religious overtone, because I don't know what the cultural characteristics are there. It's the first time I was ever in that country. I said, hi, I'm Larry Evans, and I've come here to say, and normally I don't have a problem, but my words were all garbled. I was stuttering. Nothing went out. And finally, I just said, hi, I'm Larry Evans. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist minister. I've come here because I believe that even if you can't see, hear, or walk, that you are created in the image of God. Doesn't matter if you can hear. Doesn't matter if you can see. Doesn't matter if you can walk. You're still created in the image of God just as much as I am. And there was an immediate silence over that whole audience. Just silence. And finally, a boy raised his hand. And he was deaf. And he spoke to me through his interpreter. I went to church for the first time this last Sunday. I said, wow, isn't that great? Yeah, I went for the first time. I said, how did it go? He hung his head. They told me they didn't have anything for me. Excuse me? They didn't have anything for me. So what did you do? Well, I went back home. A girl who could speak English. A pretty girl, I don't know how old, teens. And she stood up and said, I just want to tell you, we appreciate, and she started crying and couldn't finish. She sat down and put her head, covered up her head. I went back and put my hand on her shoulder. She just kept crying. To be reaffirmed that we are all created with a purpose that isn't thrown aside because we can't talk or walk or see or whatever the case may be. On the way out of there, I talked to the administrator, and one of the administrators, she said, we almost didn't let you come. And I said, oh, brother, what did I say now? What did I say wrong? I put my foot in my mouth. What did I say wrong? She says, no, it wasn't that. The last religious group that we had come in here believed that anybody who had a disability had an evil spirit. And they came to cast the evil spirit out of those people with disabilities. Seventh-day Adventist minister. The very thing that I was trying to hide is exactly what they needed to hear that day. We believe in the creation story as recorded in the Bible that God created man in his image, and therefore we have a purpose and we have an identity. We are not a disability, we are a son and daughter of God. I was getting ready. This is when I was actually clear back in Oregon Conference days. I was getting on the plane, getting ready to fly up to Canada. I was responsible for multicultural work at that time, one of my responsibilities. And I was working with the Native American Indians throughout North America, but especially in the Northwest. And by the way, it was very exciting. What we changed there through that multicultural approach that we used is the same approach we're using now with Possibility Ministries. But I was sitting there in the airport. I was reminded that before I get on a plane, before I go anywhere, I always have a special prayer. Yeah, I pray for safety, but that's really become not a major issue. The other one is a major issue. Help me to have the right influence on the people around me. I'm afforded. And last year was 175,000 air miles. That's way too much. And by the way, we do a lot of conference calls. So some of these long trips, it's not something that I enjoy anymore. I know it sounds really fascinating and wonderful, but it's tiring. So I was sitting there, and I remember, all right, Lord, yes, if I can be an influence, yes, I want to do that too. But if I can get some rest, that would be good too. So I get on the plane, and I'm seated. 3 of us here, or I think it's 3 of us on this side, and I'm seated there, and the stewardess comes to me and says, sir, would you mind moving so this man could sit with the lady you're sitting next to? It's his wife. Well, I looked at her and I said, no, I think I would like to sit with her. No, I didn't say that. And so I said, sure. And I got up and I moved back. She said, you can have the seat back there by itself. And I said, oh, wow, fantastic. God answers prayers. And so I sat back there, and I was just getting relaxed, and they were about to close the door to the plane when somebody else got on the plane. And I looked up there, because I'm way in the back, and I looked up there, and here's this guy. He's walking back. Now, I couldn't tell a whole lot at first, except that he had long hair, and it seemed to be matted. It didn't seem like it was combed. It did not look good. And then I noticed his clothing. If I remember right, his buttons were not buttoned in right. They were in the wrong holes. And to be honest with you, I watched him walk, and he was not walking in a straight line. You got the idea? And he walks back and back. And he's passing other seats, and he comes back and stands right beside that aisle seat. I'm sitting on the window seat so I could lay back and get some sleep. He's sitting on the aisle. He stands by that aisle seat, and he plops down. Oh, the smell was terrible. The smell was terrible. Now, let me tell you why it bothers me. Because it wasn't just the smell. There was a period of very impressionable years when I was a kid when my dad used to drink. And I remember Friday nights we would go out. Mom would take us in the car, and we'd cruise around looking at the different bars. I remember Kelly's especially. And we looked to see if we could find Dad. Dad would sometimes get in fights in those bars. I think he always won. He was a bigger guy. I'm taller, but he was always a bigger and stronger guy. Then he would feel sorry, and he'd kind of help the guy with the wounds he created. So the smell of alcohol brought back bad memories from those few years when my dad used to drink. Then in college, I worked for an ambulance. And I remember pulling people out of car wreck and having blood up to my elbows as I would pull them out. And all those bad memories. This guy represented those bad memories. This guy is sitting next to me. I did not want him there. And I was looking at that. And I was looking at him, and I said, oh, yes. I did pray back in the terminal. Yes, I did pray. Lord, bring me close to someone where I could have an influence. I said, but there is no way I can talk to this guy. You see, even before the plane took off, this guy fell asleep. Fortunately for me, he leaned the other direction, and he was leaning down, and then he started what I call drooling. And there was a puddle of drool on that floor in the aisle, and the stewardess, they would just step over it, but I had to sit next to him. And then I remembered what I had prayed. And I said, Lord, if there's any way I can help this guy, I'm willing. But obviously, I can't. Amen. When I prayed that prayer and I said that silent amen, I'm telling you the truth. He sat straight up and turned straight and this far from my face said, hi. Oh. It was bad news. I'm not exaggerating. I think I'm telling you exactly what happened. In fact, I think now it may have even been an angel to teach me some important principles. So anyway, may not have been, I don't know. But I said to him, well, hi, so where are you going? Well, there was only one place we could go at that point. You can't get off on the plane. We're all going to Calgary at that time. I was going there to work out an indigenous training program with our college there. And he said, I said, so why are you going there? He says, my family has rejected me. I felt, if you would just ask me, I could tell you why they might. And I said, so if your family rejected you, where are you going in Canada? He says, I have an aunt there. I said, why would your aunt accept you if your family didn't accept you? He says, I don't know. Well, maybe because she's a Christian. A Christian. Do you know what a Christian is? Do you know who Jesus is? And he said, no. I said, could I tell you about my friend Jesus? He said, yeah. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but I've used this with several people that I've met, absolute strangers, that I've met on the plane or other places. There's 4 points. Number 1, God has a plan for every person. This man just beamed. No matter what I've done, no matter who I am, what I look like or smell like, God has a plan for me. Yeah, absolutely. Number 2, we have all fallen away from that plan that God has. The Bible calls that sin, but that simply means we have stepped away from the plan that God has for us. 3, to help us get back on the plan, God had to come and give his own life so that we could find the right path. And that's what Jesus did. And number 4, God says, you get back on the path. I'm not going to abandon you. I want you to stay on the path. And that's holding us together. You see, as one professor said, not a Seventh-day Adventist, said, most Christianity today leave out the bookends of the gospel. They talk about sin and they talk about the cross, but they don't talk about creation, where God created us in His image and gave us a purpose and a design, nor do they talk about how God keeps us on the path called restoration. The Seventh-day Adventist message is about those 4 points. And it's all built on the principle that God sees possibilities in every one of us, regardless of whether we're autistic or blind or deaf or people like me who have all sorts of disabilities that don't show except my thinning hair. We have a God who understands us, who calls us, who empowers us with His Holy Spirit, because of what Jesus has done for us, because of what Jesus sees in each one of us. We have a tendency to be self-depreciating, and therefore when we do that, we tend to carry that over onto other people too. If you don't see yourself as valuable, you will depreciate and criticize other people, because it is the same Jesus who saves you that will save them. And unless you understand how God comes into your life and is willing to save you, why would anyone else believe that you love them? We have much to learn, much to teach, much to become. And so, sitting with a drunk was a day of learning for me. I realized that my prejudices of the past, for good reasons, from a father who at a particular time in his life was drinking and was quite abusive to me and to others. My ambulance experience, seeing what alcohol and blood and alcohol mixed together, creating car accidents. Yes, I had every reason to have the prejudices that I have. Absolutely. But those prejudices were limiting my thinking. Those prejudices were limiting my understanding of other people and my ability to be used by God to reach them. God has given us hope. Hope that is found in Jesus. In Romans chapter 5, verse 5 says, hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts. It was not shameful for me to sit by that man, but it was almost shameful for him to sit by me, because I was the Christian. And my prejudice was limiting what he could do through me. And so this is the message, this is the foundation message that I share when I go around the world, and I've been many places. And the reason for that is because I believe in you. I believe in me. But more important than that, I believe in God. Because God sees in us what others may never see. You may be stigmatized because of that. I was stigmatized in my mind when my dad had a mental illness and I would have to go to school after Dad would write certain things in the newspaper. But Dad was sick. Dad was sick. We need to understand. We need to understand how the journey of each one of us is different from the other. And that is why I believe I have been asked to go to the places I have, because people are beginning to realize that they have acceptance in God, acceptance in the church, acceptance with one another. And so my appeal to you, yes, says, come this afternoon. But the greater appeal is, be understanding. Become aware, become accepting, and then develop action plans. May God bless you. Thank you.